In 1979, a young man by the name of Shawn Stüssy decided to enter the surfboard shaping business in Laguna Beach, California. Having grown up in the area, Shawn fell in love with surfing at a young age and wanted to turn his passion into a living. That said, he began making boards, and to brand them as his own, he would mark them with a stylized version of his last name, Stüssy. Keep in mind that this was a small-time operation, so in the early days he would actually print this newly designed logo by hand with a black marker, and as the story goes, the logo was actually inspired by the signature of Shawn's uncle, who was an artist, which could explain why it's so appealing. Someday, people around the world would know this logo, but before that, Shawn still had some work to do. It was in 1982 that he decided to show his surfboards at the Action Sports Retailer Trade Show, which, as the name implies, was a trade show for action sports such as surfing. In addition to selling his surfboards, Shawn decided to sell t-shirts with his logo as well, thinking that if someone bought one of his shirts, it would basically be free promotion. So he wasn't really trying to break into the fashion industry or anything like that, it was really just a marketing strategy. But then, something amazing happened. Everyone at the trade show seemed to gravitate towards the shirts because they liked the logo, and by the time that it was over, Shawn had sold nearly 1,000 shirts and only 24 surfboards. Needless to say, that's not what he'd been expecting, but it made him think, if people love my t-shirts so much, why don't I just sell t-shirts? The transition to becoming a clothing brand didn't happen overnight, but he did begin planning for it, and he did so with the help of his close friend Frank Sinatra Jr. Just to be clear, this Frank Sinatra was in no way related to the Frank Sinatra. Instead, he was a certified public accountant that Shawn had met on a ski trip. And this was perfect because Shawn needed someone who could help him turn these t-shirts into an actual business. Surfboards were a different story because he knew that business like the back of his hand, but for him, the fashion industry was uncharted territory. So he and Frank began drafting a business plan, and in 1984, they officially relaunched Stüssy as a clothing brand. Now, one thing I want to be very clear about is that even though Stüssy was now a clothing brand, Shawn had no intention of abandoning his roots. That meant he would continue marketing towards surfers, because after all, they're the ones that showed interest in these shirts in the first place. But over the course of the next few years, word started to spread. People in the surfing community were starting to recognize the Stüssy logo, and it made its way into other subcultures as well, such as skating and music. In many ways, wearing this Stüssy logo became a way for people to show that they were a part of these subcultures, and in the early years, I think that's what most people liked about the brand. Sure, it looked cool, but it was also authentic. Now, of course, as the brand expanded and it started to become more popular, people outside of these subcultures started to wear Stüssy as well. A lot of their, what I guess you would call competitors at the time, were trying to make their clothes stand out with giant graphics, bold colors, and funky patterns. Don't get me wrong, Stüssy would lean in that direction every now and again, but for the most part, they kept it simple. For instance, their most popular product was just a plain t-shirt with their logo on it, and people liked it because it was a reflection of the surfing and skating worlds, and they could also wear it just about anywhere, whether that be to the club or to go get groceries. To me, that's what makes a piece truly timeless, and I have to imagine that Shawn's previous design experience played a big part in this. Something I hadn't mentioned earlier is that Shawn didn't just shape surfboards, he made designs for them as well. It should come as no surprise that surfers are intimately connected with their boards, and it's not like they're getting a new board every other week. Some of them can last for years, so it was really important to his customers that they were buying a design that could stand the test of time, and that approach seems to have translated to his work with Stüssy. Now, the fact that the brand had been adopted by surfers, skaters, and musicians, as well as the fact that people would wear it anywhere and everywhere, all points to the fact that Stüssy was truly one of the first streetwear brands. Back then, the concept of streetwear didn't really exist, at least not the way that it exists now. It described a style movement that was beginning to take shape in some of America's major cities, including Los Angeles and primarily New York. Nobody really knew what streetwear could someday become, but Shawn and Frank had a feeling that it was going to be big, so they decided to take a chance. They packed up their bags and headed to New York to open a brick-and-mortar location. They had made a name for themselves in California, half of their customer base was made up of surfers, and now they were moving across the country to ride this new streetwear wave. No pun intended. Well, anyways, this decision ended up being a smart one because New York was not only the home of this newly emerging streetwear movement, but it was also the home of hip-hop, a genre that would embrace streetwear stronger than any other. Shawn would later reflect on this transitional period in the brand's history, saying, "Hip-hop was in a good moment. The dots were connecting with other things besides the beach. It was a good time. Now, even though we've established that Stüssy was a pioneer of the streetwear aesthetic, breaking into New York's fashion scene is a notoriously difficult thing to do. Fortunately, they had the help of a local, and that local's name was James Jebbia. James Jebbia had experience working at some of the city's local skate shops, including Parachute and Union. Not only did this give him connections in the skate community, but it also taught him what it takes to run a shop, and that's exactly what Shawn and Frank needed help with. Shawn and James actually met because James wanted to start stocking Stüssy pieces at Union, and from there the relationship blossomed. In 1991, they joined forces to launch a Stüssy store in Soho, and by this point the brand was already popular, but this was still a make-or-break moment for them. It was a test of whether or not Stüssy could succeed in other markets, and did it ever. Just as it had happened back in California, Stüssy quickly became a favorite among New York's most fashion-forward, and that didn't just include these young skater kids. In an interview with Complex, Eddie, who was the manager of Union, recalls that he used to see JFK Jr. regularly biking around Soho, wearing a suit and a Stüssy hat. So that tells you all you need to know. Stüssy really was starting to make a dent in New York's fashion scene. It was going toe-to-toe with some of the bigger brands, and I don't just mean streetwear brands. Again, streetwear was a relatively new thing, and before it, the big-name luxury houses on Fifth Avenue were usually the ones dominating the conversation. I'm talking Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Dior, and Chanel. As crazy as it sounds, Stüssy was stealing some of the spotlight from these brands by steering the conversation towards streetwear, and to highlight that, Shawn created Stüssy's now infamous Double S logo. In case you can't already tell, this is a direct reference to Chanel's Double C logo, and aside from the fact that it's cool, it was his way of saying that Stüssy was just as good as these big-name brands charging exorbitant prices for their products. Speaking of which, one thing that Stüssy has always taken pride in as a brand is its reasonable prices. At any point in their history, they could have jacked the prices up, but that wouldn't have been true to their roots. They know that their customers are mostly young surfers and skater kids who can't be spending their entire paychecks on a hoodie, so they've made a real effort to keep the brand accessible to everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. The move to New York had been a resounding success, and as they say, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Shawn really took this to heart, because it was around this time that he began traveling the world to form the International Stüssy Tribe. The International Stüssy Tribe was basically a collective of designers, musicians, and artists of all disciplines that inspired Shawn, and he would give them all personalized International Stüssy Tribe jackets with their name on it. The tribe included some big names like Hiroshi Fujiwara and Goldie, but it also included some people that you've probably never heard of that Shawn just really respected. While none of the tribe's members got paid to promote the brand, the members-only jackets gave the collective an air of exclusivity and mystique that naturally acted as a marketing campaign. Everyone wanted to be a part of the tribe, and they even had meetings that were more like parties, which everyone wanted to get invited to. Shawn never intended for it to become this highly exclusive club, but I guess this was one of his earliest lessons about the sheer power of hype. Anyways, it was in large part thanks to members of the tribe such as Michael Kopelman that Stüssy started to expand overseas, and before long, the brand was internationally recognized. By all accounts, things were going great, but then they took a turn. Stüssy had grown so fast and so quickly that by the mid-1990s, countless other brands had taken notice and were doing their own variations of what Stüssy was doing. Some put their own spin on it, but others were blatantly ripping the brand off, and there was little they could do to stop it. At the same time, there were other streetwear brands starting to pop up that would challenge Stüssy for its market share. One such brand was founded by the very same man that had helped Shawn and Frank launch their store in Soho, James Jebbia. In 1994, he launched a streetwear brand of his own, and that brand's name was Supreme. I'll save that story for another video, but the point is that Stüssy had helped create this concept of streetwear, and now it was growing so quickly that they could hardly keep up with the competition. From what I understand, there may have been some internal discussion about changing Stüssy's design approach to keep up with market trends, but that didn't sit too well with Shawn. Keep in mind that he didn't come from the world of fashion. He was a born and bred surfer, and to tell you the truth, this whole thing had sort of fallen into his lap. Don't get me wrong, he has a great mind for design and worked incredibly hard to turn this brand into a multi-million-dollar business, but he only went down this path after seeing the demand for his promo t-shirts. If it hadn't been for that, who knows if he ever would have thought twice about fashion. So in 1996, Shawn decided to step away from the brand that he had created and sold his remaining stake to his business partner Frank. Now, of course, anytime a founder leaves their brand, there's concern about how much longer things are going to last, but fortunately, Stüssy was able to weather the storm. According to Frank, who is now the sole owner and CEO of the brand, Stüssy struggled after Shawn's departure and was only able to survive because of its incredibly strong cult following in Japan. That said, Frank was still looking for ways to help the brand regain its ground in the American market, and he kicked off that effort by launching Stüssy's first ever collaboration. This collaboration with G-Shock was a groundbreaking one, and I'll explain why. Nowadays, it seems like every streetwear brand is doing new collaborations every other week, but back in 1997, this wasn't that common, and it certainly wasn't common to see streetwear brands collaborating with non-clothing brands. By collaborating with G-Shock, a watch company, Stüssy was creating a new accessory for their fans to wear, and they went crazy for it. Building off of the success of this collaboration, it was a few years later in 2001 that Stüssy first formed this partnership with Nike. Together, they released a pair of Dunk Highs, one of which had snakeskin leather on the swoosh, and they sold out in just 2 days. Dunks were the perfect choice for this collab because they're a skate shoe, and Stüssy had just recently launched its first ever skate team in an effort to reaffirm its identity as a true skate brand. The hype behind this collab let them know that they were onto something, and over the course of the next few years, they continued redesigning some of Nike's most iconic models. The partnership between Stüssy and Nike is still going strong today, with some of the most recent collabs featuring the Nike Spiridon and the Air Force One, both of which were very well received. Thanks to collabs like these, Stüssy was able to regain some of its momentum, and in 2014, the brand shifted focus once again as Frank Sinatra's son David took his place as CEO. Now, David didn't come in and make any drastic changes, because all things considered, Frank had been doing a good job. But you can see a noticeable shift towards higher-end clothing after David joined. And look, I'm not saying that he tried to turn it into a high-end luxury house. Stüssy still clung to its roots as a streetwear brand, but the pieces just seemed to be a bit more thoughtful. In 2020, to celebrate the brand's 40th anniversary, Stüssy invited Rick Owens, Virgil Abloh, Marc Jacobs, Takahiro Miyashita, and Martine Rose to reimagine the brand's classic World Tour t-shirt. And in my opinion, this was the perfect way to pay homage to Stüssy's history. It had been 40 years since Shawn Stüssy took a chance by shifting lanes and deciding to release his own line of t-shirts despite having no experience in the fashion industry. And 40 years later, there were some of the most influential figures in fashion offering their own spin on his design. It was a full circle moment, and while it's a shame that Shawn was no longer involved with the brand at this point, Stüssy has accomplished some great things since his departure. And to his credit, he has too. For Dior's Fall/Winter 2020 collection, creative director Kim Jones, a well-known streetwear fanatic, decided to collaborate with Shawn Stüssy, the man commonly referred to as the godfather of streetwear. This was a collaboration with Shawn himself, not Stüssy the brand, and it blended many of Kim's signature design elements with Shawn's unique aesthetic. So it's great to see that he's still active and that he's rightfully getting the recognition that he deserves, but I have to wonder what he thinks of the brand today. In the same Complex article that I referred to earlier, Paul Middleman, who took over as creative director after Shawn left, went on the record saying, "Trust me, Shawn didn't leave on good terms. If you had a brand with your last name on it and you left because you didn't like the way it was going down, do you think he really left happy?" That's a fair point, but it opens the door for so many what-ifs. What if Shawn had never left Stüssy? What if he had continued running the brand the way that he wanted to? Would Stüssy have become even bigger than it is today, or would it have fallen behind? It's impossible to say for certain, but what we can say for certain is that things turned out quite alright either way. Nowadays, Stüssy is still one of the most respected names in streetwear, and they're continuing to put out high-quality collections and collaborations each year. The whole reason that I wanted to make this episode in the first place was to drive home the point that Stüssy helped shape streetwear as we know it. As we've discussed, streetwear didn't really exist before Stüssy came along, and while there were a number of other brands and cultural influences that led to the creation of streetwear, no one can deny the role that Stüssy played in that. Anyways, that's all for now. If you liked this episode and want to see more, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and also check out the Patreon for exclusive content and early access to episodes like these. Other than that, thank you all for watching Threaducation, and I will see you next time.